present Professor Haluk Çetinkaya from the
Mimar Sinan.
Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, Department of Archaeology in Istanbul, Republic of Turkey. He's a faculty member there since 2004. That's too long. But anyway, so he's got a dissertation on the Middle Byzantine religious architecture in Constantinople, which was defended in 2003, and he had been a part of team member of the Survey Historical Istanbul, team member of the Survey of Bithynia, which he will present results today. And between 2012 and 2015, he led the first and only Turkish archaeological expedition in Europe, which is actually in Ulpiana, in Kosovo. And he participated in several international congresses and papers abroad, including 2 times in Bulgaria, and of course 3 times in Bulgaria with Jambo, and 4 times missing the 4th one, but there will be another one, no problem. And we have the pleasure to have him to give us a speech, a lecture on the NICAEA from its foundation till the Ottomans. This lecture is a part of the project Labedia, Encyclopedia of the Late Antique Balkans. So just a few words. After the lecture is over, there will be a Q&A section. We can write your questions down on the screen on the chat, or we can ask them directly after the lecture is ending. So feel free to ask Haluk. He's very talkative, so it could be a problem. So Haluk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivo, and thank you, Zlatomira, for giving me such an opportunity. And I'm really grateful for you such an initiative for the studies in the Balkans, especially for late antiquity. It's been omitted, and you turned a new page in history. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Really, you're doing a great job to put all the people over the Balkans into one cup, and that's a good project. The topic of today is NICAEA. The reason why I chose the title as From Its Foundations Till the Ottomans is because most of the time people consider NICAEA for its tiles, which was specialized in during the Ottoman period. But what we have in hand is the Nicene Council. This is a satellite image of the city today, and I will show some other images as well from the past. When it was established, when it was founded, it is nearly a consensus for all the speakers, all the researchers, the 4th century, the Hellenistic period. And that's the time it was established and re-established. Nicaea is claimed to be the wife of the founder, and 4th century BC is the foundation date accepted mostly. Why I say mostly? Because we have an 11th century inscription mentioning Helikore as a city being established slightly before the foundation date of Nicaea in 4th century. It refers 5th century, but it is only a side note from an 11th century manuscript. So how serious we should be taken into consideration, that's a different thing. But one of the most important peculiarities of this city, it still retains the main route of north-south and east-west axis. It is just by the lake Askanos. Askania was also the name given to that, and the city is established by the lake. A historical figure was chosen to be the founder or the co-founder of the city. Hence, we have the coins, the Roman period coins, indicating this was established by Heracles from the reign of Domitianus. You can see that. So these were well marked, and these minted coins not only are the only examples, but we have 3 areas in the northern part of the city, just before entering the city. We have the quarries. At the entrance of one of the quarries, we have this figure of Heracles carved out of the rock. So we have other parts, and we have also legendary founder, another legendary founder, Dionysus. It's interesting, as you all know, Dionysus was originally a warrior god, then turned into a wine god. And in rare examples, he's depicted to ride his chariot with elephants, not horses, but elephants. So NICAEA was well established with the guidance of Heracles. Actually, Heracles accidentally established it as he was searching for his friend. So the city has 4 main gates, and these gates were named after the towns they're heading towards. So we have the inscription in the upper part, and these are imaginary statues. Actually, these could have been the statues of the families, like the Cassius family, because Cassius were originally from Bithynia, and Cassius Dio was from this as well, from this area as well. So we have the foundation story of the city, mentioning the names of Dionysus, and also we have the name of Heracles. Most probably inside the niches, they had the statues of the governors or the donors, Cassius family. In some of the examples, we have also Tühe being mentioned there in the coins. I'll show several other coins, but one of the rarest examples indicate also Serapis. Probably they had also some merchants from Egypt who were dealing with the grain trade. That's why they had a temple dedicated to Serapis. Otherwise, there's no point to have a Serapis temple here. Most probably, of course, Severus Alexander had it established. One of the early coins, which depicts the city walls here, as early as 3rd century, mid-3rd century, indicates the gates facing up and down, as you can see. These are believed, these were the arches, then became part of the system of defense, which is still standing there. The city walls of Nicaea, Iznik, is one of the best preserved in Turkey. And although it was damaged nearly 1,000 years ago at 1065, still it's in very good shape. Excuse me, something went wrong. Okay, there it is. So we have, from the written sources, we have the temples indicated there, and also a colonnaded street, 2-storied colonnaded street. Unfortunately, no trace of it survived. But recently, for Rotary Club, I did a work as an advisor together with Tayfun Öner. Probably you're not familiar with his name, but he's done the project called Byzantium 1200. So this is part of that project where we imagined there was a colonnaded porticoed street with a monumental archway in the middle of it. Just outside the city, not much of Hellenistic period survived, but we have early Roman examples. There are 2 bridges. It used to be having the river flowing underneath, but because of the earthquakes, unfortunately, the bed of the river changed. So we have 2 brick bridges in the middle of the fields, which doesn't make any sense, but they are still there. These are from the reign of Hadrian, from 2nd century. Probably from the Bithynian kingdom. Long before it became Nicaea, the area was ruled by the Bithynian kings. And when the Hellenistic period was about to end, the Romans approached the Bithynian kings, and they allied themselves together with other local chieftains here. And as a result, the Bithynia became part of the empire of Rome. So actually, Bithynia was combined with Mithridates. So they were given hard times to the Romans, but at the end, they were defeated. So this large sarcophagus is believed to be one of the Bithynian kings. So this is a 19th century photograph indicating this is known as Berberkaya. And from the distance, we have the view of the city walls there. You can see probably this one is also Hellenistic. Recently, several areas during agricultural activities in the city and around. The treasure hunters or the farmers themselves, they bumped into underground burials. This is one of the best and intact burials. Slightly after the treasure hunters penetrated, I was able to go there. This is the photograph I have taken in 2006. As you can see, the door is still working. And as you go in, you can see the traces of modern age. People went in, spent some time there, and took whatever they found it. So this is also a Hellenistic tomb from the city. We have one important source, Strabo. He mentions that if you put a stone in the middle of the city, you can see all four cardinal gates of the city. So all major gates can be seen. So that tells us even in the early Roman period, we have the city in the grid form. I suppose the red-lined area was the limit of the Hellenistic city, which was then enlarged. Today, the population is not much more different than what it was in the past. In the past, maybe it was around 10, 15,000. Today, it's around 40,000, not much of a big difference. This is the drawing of Charles Texier from 1838. The reason why I choose this one is one of the major problems of this settlement was malaria. And we have the travelers saying that these people are green. Because of the malaria, they were called as the green people town. And in the upper part, there's a triangle. That's the area I suspect that this was the location of the Roman palace. Because that very same area is used by the Ottoman governor. And as you can see, only the central part of the city was used by the people for housing. This is from a French magazine taken in 1910 that shows how small the settlement in the city was. NICAEA, or when the Turks call it, or how the Turks call it, Iznik, was a small town always. Upon the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, I will refer at the end of 11th century, it became an important trade center. But during the Ottoman Empire, they made this place famous because of its pottery. Probably pottery was one of the oldest traditions in this area, long before the Ottomans or the Seljuks, the Byzantines were doing this. These are taken from the Turkish Air Force. This photograph is from 1943 that shows how small the settled area of the city is, especially in the eastern part of the city, there was the settlement. If you divide it into four, you can see the main axis, north, south, east, west. Only at the eastern portion of the city, there was a settlement. What we have here is a photograph from 1961. You can see the town started to grow towards west. And this one is 2020. So the city grew not only inside the city walls, but also outside the city walls as well. So in 1961, not only they have taken photographs from the air, but also they had from the Navy a diving team in the shores of the lake where they came across with some tombs. Soon afterwards, it was followed by a filming crew. They also confirmed that there are several long walls in the northern part of the city. Unfortunately, no one paid attention until recently. So I will come to that point, but shortly, Iznik was one of the most neglected, or Nicaea was most neglected parts of both the Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, and also the Ottoman Empire. Tabula Poitengirana points where Iznik is. So this is an important point, not far from the capital city, not far from Constantinople, and not far from Bithynian heartland, but never gained importance it deserved, I believe. So this is the only surviving section underneath a Turkish bath, Murat Hüdavendigar, who was killed in Kosovo, the Ottoman Sultan. So when he built the mosque, I beg your pardon, when he built the Turkish bath, it was by simply making use of the Roman road material. So in other words, this road is a 2nd century Roman road from the time of Hadrian, but to the right of it is a Turkish bath. There's another portion of this road is by the lake of Lefke. Outside the city, one of the rarest examples of pyramid-like or obelisk-like tomb. This is the tomb of Cassius family, and they had their pyre probably outside, and the ashes have been kept inside. There we have an inscription there, mentions. Not only inscription, but also the graffiti are important because this was acting as something like a lighthouse for the pilgrims or for the travelers. This also remained in the north, just outside the city, when people were walking. This is one of the major routes people had around Nicaea. There were two routes. One was going through the north, that was the trade route, and the other one was going through the south of the lake, that was the military route. So this is found in the northern, the regular route for the merchants and for the pilgrims. One of the most important monuments of the city is its theatre, and it was not recognized as theatre for a long time, but they had barrel vaults like these, as old as the time of 17th century. This was not identified, but also Dr. Cowell, the British Dr. Cowell in 17th century suggested this could have been the substructure supporting the seating row of the theatres. But it's interesting, both the Ottomans and the Byzantines were using this place as the kilns for their pottery, and later Ottomans used the manure of the pigeons coming from here for making something like a gunpowder. This is the theatre. For a long, long time, it's been excavated. I believe one of the slowest excavations of the city, but it's also very interesting to have this theatre because it was soon after it was abandoned as theatre, it acted for different purposes like a church and cemetery. So this is aerial view, and we have the new team excavating that place. The arrows point to all the churches or the chapels within the theatre. The one on the left-hand side, you can see partially. This was for as funeral church, smaller than Bachkova, but similar in fate. And the one on the right-hand side is a tiny little section with traces of frescoes and with inscription, Lord save us, probably intended to be for family only. This is from the seats of the theatre, how the bodies have been placed and how the church was discovered in 1990s. And these are the traces of the frescoes in the section of the orchestra of the theatre. You can see there, and there are some sections where they have come across with the pieces. Parts of the theatre have been used in fortifying the city walls. You can see them in the upper part of the walls. And the theatrical masks have been used probably to ward off the evil or the enemies, to scare them off, by the gate of Istanbul, facing Istanbul. That's why it was named so. And back to this. And we have another major gate. Istanbul Gate is the northern gate. This is the gate called as Lefke, because there was a small town called as Lefke in the eastern part of the city. Until recently, it was half filled. So the lower part of the archway was not visible. And when they lowered the earth, they came across with the Roman road level as it was by the Turkish path there. So this is the second and major gates there. So the archway, the lower part, exposed us the original entrance. But the arches up there, which used to house the statues, nothing of the statues survived, but also have traces of frescoes. Most probably these were added in the 13th century. On the left-hand side, you can see lots of hollow marks. Probably there was a carving attached there. Nothing of it survived, so that's why we cannot speculate. But to the right, there is someone holding something like a sword, looks like a military man. And this one also whitewashed shortly. This is also probably one of the saints, military saints defending the city. One particular thing came to my mind as I regularly visit this place is a cut through the archway in the major gates. So why it is there, it was not recognized before. Only in Nicaea, we see this system, and this is the system called portcullis. This is an example from Ireland, just to give you the idea. This system was not known in the Byzantine Empire, but why do we have it in Nicaea? Because we have in 13th century, at the beginning of 13th century, the fourth Crusaders capturing Constantinople. Then some of the families, they escaped and they re-established the new capital as Nicaea for 57 years until 1261. That acted as the new city-state. Soon afterwards, it started to widen up the borders, and part of the army was consisting of the Western merchants. Actually, it was nearly half. So probably they introduced this system of portcullis. This is the only one, to my knowledge, in Turkey. Not in Constantinople, nowhere other than this place. It's interesting to note. And in every major gate, they had this cut, and this was the opening there. Another important detail, again in the north, just to the west of the main gate, is the section of the city walls with inscriptions and with marble covering. As we all know, marble is rather expensive and unnecessary to clad the walls, especially the city walls there. So it indicates there was a major construction activity going there, and there was a ruin, and most probably that was a ruin of a church. So that provided the material. We have the inscription here, naming Artabastos, who defended the city against the infidel, naming the Muslim armies. So this is part of the city. Again, the wall, the same wall. So this is the area, I believe, part of the Byzantine, rather Roman palace was. In 2nd century AD, there is the tunnel waterway, you can see there. An aqueduct was added there by Hadrian. So not only they had one layer of the city wall, but 2nd century city wall was enlarged. In 3rd century, as we have seen in the coins, we have a well-defended city with major gates. But soon afterwards, especially after 7th century onwards, they had an outer wall added. So that's why we have the double walling system here. Most of the walls perished, but at least parts of the main entrances have the towers surviving it. So this is from the Lefke gate. It's also interesting, during the repair works by the Lefke gate, they came across with apses, the small apse on the right-hand side with the main apse. So that indicates that there was a small church attached to the gate of the city. And unfortunately, this is a photograph taken by one of my students from Iznik. He couldn't have anything as a measuring tool, so that's why he just put his lighter there. So this is the tomb of a baby attached to the Lefke gate, just outside the gate. This is the one. He reported to the local museum, and they have taken the bones, but probably there were more buried there. It's interesting, just outside the gate, Lefke gate, in other words, Eastern Gate, there's a Muslim cemetery at the moment. And there were also some of the carvings, probably a defeat of the Goths. So this is to commemorate victory of the Roman army against the Goths, invading Goths. And this is a general view of the city towards west. You can see most of the city walls are intact and still standing there. And that's from the northern gate, from the Istanbul gate. These are the photographs from 19th century. As early as 19th century, earthquakes and the tremors reshaped the city. And I always suggested to dig deeply. So that's why this is during the restorations of 2018, 2019. So when they lowered the gate, they came across with a road in the middle. That's an Ottoman one. Just below that, it was the Byzantine road. This is from the project I was mentioning before, the Rotary Club project. So we just suggested that this was the main entrance from north and a porticoed street with a triangular area just after the gate on the right-hand side was reserved for the Roman palace, most probably established by the Bithynian kings, and it continued by the Roman emperors. Inside that gate, an oval area was created. So this is the area we thought with no function, because there are towers and suddenly you have such a place. But apparently, as they dig deeply, they came across with low parts of the wall, fine, but also a church on the right-hand side. So where the hole is on the right-hand side, that is the place where a column was mounted, on top of which there was the table, the altar table. So in other words, we are looking towards north, and the column base, the circular hole on the ground, indicates the location of the apse. Just before us, with a blanket-like thing, geotextile, you can see one of the burials there. There are 7 tombs discovered in and outside the church. It is nearly impossible to date the church because there are no coins found in there, and the pottery is kitchenware. I was not given the access to that, so that's why I cannot tell. But I speculate, I believe this could have been the church dedicated to Saint Nicholas, because we have Teixeira's description and also Dr. Kawa's description saying that by Istanbul Gate there's a small church dedicated to Saint Nicholas, and locals, they adore him, so they visited regularly. This could have been the place. And we have the founder of Constantinople, but also an important figure for the council, the first ecumenical council. Recently in Demre, during the excavations and repair works of the church there, we came across with frescoes depicting the Council of Nicaea, which was held in the year 325. The number of the participants speculated, hundreds of them. Do not want to go into detail, but probably around 400 monks were there. And we know from Eusebius telling us in detail, it was in the innermost area of the palace, the safest area. And it is clear that on both sides there were seats, and the emperor walked through the participants, ended up in an apse. So that tells me this was a basilical formed area. Probably it was a civilian basilica turned into a church later. But there were several suggestions in later centuries because of the comparisons made by the travelers. It was suggested to be a rotunda building as the gathering place of the first council. I disagree with that. So these are some of the principles. So we have the suggestion of the palace, how it might have looked. So these are simply speculation, but simply that's what we thought. And these were the structures in Constantinople. So it should have been similar. So that's why in one of the basilical form buildings, that could have been the gathering place of the first ecumenical council. And it was facing towards the lake. And just like the palace in Spalato, in Split, of Diocletian, and in Constantinople, we have the Bukaleon Palace. And probably it was the same thing of Diocletian again, not far from here, or Nicomedia. Nicomedia and Nicaea, they were always in rivalry to be the head of Bithynia, because both had the title of Neocorus. They hold the imperial cult, but Nicomedia was one step ahead most of the time. So we have, after Christianity was established, we have some of the most important monuments there. And of course, we have Hagia Sophia. Until recently, it was in ruinous condition, as you can see in the photograph on the right-hand side. And it's been decided to turn into a mosque again. So that's why it was roofed. So it started to function as a mosque again. The interior shows like this. And during that work, some important details were observed by myself. Traces of frescoes and the figures are still visible in the chambers, most probably past the floor, yeah? And what I indicate here on the ground floor, on the ground mosaic, is fleur de lis. So this was mistaken by some researchers as the intervention of the fourth Crusaders and the mercenaries they brought along with them, but actually this belongs, so this is something like a trademark of the Lascaris family. Lascaris are the ones who ruled from 1204 until 1261. We have the traces of the frescoes inside. Unfortunately, that area was reserved by the tobacco dealers, and because of the smoke, it was darkened. So during the early excavations of 1930s, Synchronum was discovered on site in situ, and that tells us the time period, or most probably it was a 5th or 6th century church. It was enlarged after the earthquakes as the entrance was beautified with the floor mosaics. I was mentioning the fleur de lis, as you can see there. What I believe, it was a 6th century church enlarged after 1065 earthquake, which destroyed nearly all the structures of the building. There were 3 major earthquakes. One was in 2nd century during the time of Hadrian. Then in 6th century, during the time of Justinian I, the city was nearly entirely destroyed, so that's why he rebuilt it according to Procopius. And 1065 was the time the city walls cracked, most of the buildings perished, and 1204 was the time when the Lascaris were in charge and they restored most of the buildings. We have on the coins of the Lascaris dynasty the fleur de lis, as you can see, scattered all around. And in one of the rare occasions in late Byzantine coins, we have Virgin Mary as the guardian of the city, just like Constantinople, surrounded by the city walls, hard to pick up. Just to the south of Hagia Sophia, we have a paraklesion with the same technique, opus sectile, to beautify the place. There were seven bodies discovered here. Probably this was the haristique system involved here. A haristikarios poured money in return to be buried there with his family members. Inside, when you enter Hagia Sophia, to the left, in other words, to north, there is a half-filled arcosolium type of burial. In the middle, we have the deisis scene, and on both sides, there were two standing male figures. Both had the halos around it. That indicates they were saints, but unfortunately, nearly impossible to trace who they are. But at least we have the burial of one individual who respected the saints. Again, as they repaired the place, during the repair, they removed some of the blocking stones, so they came across with the figure decorative patterns of the frescoes. So that's why it was suggested to be iconoclastic period. I'm not so sure it. One of the most important and intriguing buildings within the city is a böcek ayazma, an ayazma with insects. God knows why it's called. It's a circular building. Doesn't look like an ayazma. Instead, I believe it must have been a martyrium. So this is a fifth building, very similar to this was Volachans, again was published by Schneider. Alphonse Maria Schneider was very active in Istanbul and also in Nicaea. Both were studied by him in 1930s. So it's interesting, in the middle of this ayazma, we have a reused material here. In the lower part, on the right-hand side, you can see the Greek inscription talking about one section of the Bible, Jewish Bible, with menorah on the left-hand side. And in the upper part, we have an inscription restoring story of one of the towers by Michael. Hang on, I made the same mistake again. Press the, okay. Whoop. Okay, I'm back. Not far from there, not far from böcek ayazma, the one pointed by the arrow on the right-hand side, approximately around 50 meters to the left is another church, Kimisis, the Ascension of Virgin Mary. That church was there. That was one of the most important. This is one of the photographs from the end of 19th century. This is how the church looked like. An interior design, although was much touched, it had some of the nicest mosaics inside there. One of the mosaics was the mosaic of Virgin Mary. It's interesting to see on both sides of her, in the standing figure, there were marks. It was suggested that it was a cross replacing the Virgin Mary during iconoclastic period, which I totally agree. And I suggested the same thing for Hagia Sophia, the Virgin Mary in Hagia Sophia recently. Unfortunately, after the First World War, when Ottoman Empire by then, when Ottoman Empire was invaded, the invading Greek army destroyed some of the mosques. In return, as a retaliation, one of the churches, unfortunately it happens to be this one, was destroyed. So what remained of it is something like a garden with broken pieces. During the works of one group who specialized in the Ottoman kilns in Iznik, whenever there was an ongoing infrastructural work, they were informed. So as a result, they were involved in several excavations other than the Ottoman field, which they specialize in. This is one of the churches, as they called it, a burial church. It's in the northern part. And I believe this was one of the palatial churches in the north where the palace was. Another church was discovered in 1940s as it was discovered, it was a rather high one in the north, not far from Istanbul Gate, and that is the situation currently in 2020. So this was a plan drawn afterwards. It's a large cross and square, and this is what I suggested. Originally, it might have looked like. And not far from here, a little piece was found here, a reliquary. Most probably it came from this church. It was found actually from the area of the city walls. It was recorded by the local museum. Whereabouts of it is not for certain. Another church is identified as the Church of St. Tryphon. It's still in ruinous condition, and I suggested it might have looked like this. And actually, the form and the plan of it is very similar to Kora. During infrastructural works, most of the time people come across with pieces like this one. It's part of a late Roman, probably 4th, 5th century piece with water pipe in its original position, was discovered, a house. And this is a photograph from my own study. In 2018, I had the permission to work in the garden of the Museum of Iznik, which was moving. So these are the piles they obtained from the illegal excavations, which were dumped into one hole. They, just before categorized them, they brought them into the garden of the museum, where I discovered some important pieces, like this one. So this is most probably came from the northern part of the city, where 3 cemeteries are, and this mentions the Mother Mary, and this could have been the Church of Mary, or at least dedicated together with one of the other archangels or Virgin Mary. So this is a lintel piece, came from that church, dumped into a dumpster, discovered in the garden of a mosque, and it was brought into the museum. Another piece I discovered was most probably the bust of Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, whereabouts of it is not clear, but at least we have a high-bas relief of Jesus Christ here. As the museum building itself is an old imaret, an Ottoman structure, they wanted to enlarge the area towards west, so they dug the area. What a surprise, they came across with an entire neighborhood. So this neighborhood, to my mind, is Keramikyon. So this is the area where there was the monastic church for the ceramic makers. And as you can see, the water pipes scattered all around. This is a Byzantine neighborhood where they specialized in firing kilns. And this is the church I was mentioning about. Opus Sectile was partially gone. And they found 27 tombs in and around the place. And an artist's image, Derya, a friend of mine, made it, Derya Ülker, thanks to her. Not far from there is the Turkish excavation of kilns, exactly the same material, same thing there. So kilns and the tiles are continuing tradition of NICAEA. One of the most saddest stories is the hypogeia of Iznik. One of the hypogeia was discovered outside the city. In order to protect it, a structure was built around it. Unfortunately, even that was broken into. Before and after photographs you can see. On the left-hand side, when it was discovered. On the right-hand side, treasure hunters, as we all know, behind every cross, behind every circular thing are golden coins. So that's why they opened up that place. So it's in ruins. Very recently, roughly around 3 years ago, another tomb was discovered, another hypogeum was discovered. As you can see, the bodies are laying down there with burial grounds there. So this is the photograph provided to me by the student of mine who's the native of that area. And this was also published by Urs Peschel. God knows how he obtained that. This is a tomb from the same cemetery, from the Northern Cemetery from 1990s. In 2012, when the level of the water in the lake really dropped, the municipality of Bursa was photographing the areas, historical parts of the city of Bursa, including Iznik NICAEA. And as they were flying over, they came across with this, they photographed it, and it's been decided to excavate the place. It's currently being excavated by Bursa Uludağ University, and it was suggested to be a church dedicated to Saint Neophytos. That could be right, because Saint Neophytos was martyred not far from the point of martyrdom outside the city walls. To commemorate his loss, they built a church. this fits quite well. That could be the perfect place for that. A very rough, sketchy drawing just to indicate how the basilical form church could have been. So this is just to give you an idea. Recently, during a summer school, a German team under Istanbul Archaeological Institute, so they came across with the evidence suggesting that there was a cross in square or Greek cross type of church underneath there. It's impossible to date it, but they suggested such a plan in the northwestern part of the city again. So all in all, in 2020, I wrote a book about NICAEA, as it's in Turkish, unfortunately, for the moment. I will translate it in English, but give me some time and you'll be able to read it in English as well. So this is to indicate where the churches inside and outside the city, at least 14 churches we have, tangible evidence is there. Recently, in 2020, they came across with niches and received a phone call saying that this is a church. Apparently it's not, because what looks like an apse, when they continued excavating, so that turned out to be a Roman bath, or rather Byzantine bath, a late Byzantine bath. So this is the heating system underneath there. So at least we continue excavating the sites where they came across with old pieces. In the last two or three slides of mine, I wanted to show one particular section of the city, southern part of the city. When the city was attacked by the Crusaders, the locals who defended the city were the Seljuk Turks. It's interesting. In 1071, Manzikert was the time when the Turkish army defeated the Byzantines. And 7 years later, in 1078, it became the first Turkish capital in today's Turkey. So it was the Sultanate of Iznik. So when they were here, they held the city for some time. Then the first Crusaders came. They made a special deal with the Crusaders, but then Crusaders broke it. Byzantine Empire intervened, and Byzantine emperors suggested them to have the free trade and not to be slaughtered. So in return, they emptied the place. But slightly before that, when the city was under attack, one of the towers collapsed, so that's why it was Natas. And not far from there is this tower rebuilt with some of the tombs of the Seljuks, as you can see there. These are the oldest tombs from the first Turkish capital in Iznik. Shortly, what started as a 4th century Hellenistic city with the grid plan continues even today. And not only it had the Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and the Seljuk periods, but also the Ottoman period as well. But basically, it retains the plan, the housing changes within the city whenever there was the housing. So lots of things change, but luckily, as they construct something, so it provides us also very important information. Thanks for your patience. If there are questions, I'll be happy to answer.